It is my pleasure to welcome all of our ISM members and guests to today's program hosted by ISM New Jersey. Please be sure to use the chat for any comments or questions for our speakers. Today's program is the final in our billion-dollar Best Practice series, which is sponsored by Epicor. Our program today will be on customer-centric transformations. I will now turn the program over to our host for today, Kristen.
Hi, and welcome. It's wonderful to be speaking with you again. I don't necessarily know how many of you are rejoining us, but we hope you're finding these sessions really, really valuable. And Morgan, can you advance the slides? Thank you. So I am Kristen Valentine. And have moderated in the past. But more importantly, I'm super excited to bring our CFO, Joe Ayers, as well as Rebecca Dodge. And as we move through the presentation, you're going to see why I'm so excited about having these two, because they're really innovators within Epicor and how we do business. And of course, as part of this series, we continue to profile Epicor and the challenges that we face and how we're embracing the market and transforming as this opportunity to talk through those best practices. And most notably, what's exciting about both Joe and Rebecca is their background from both the Big Four as well as startups. So let's move on to the next slide and just take a little moment to kind of talk about who we are in case you are new to this series. We are a billion-dollar ERP provider. And you can see, obviously, global in nature, lots of employees, and that's obviously a lots of complexity. But we also grew from collaborating and being the trusted advisor of smaller companies. So that's why we feel Epicor is a great case study to kind of look at, because we're hoping you see yourselves and the challenges that your companies are facing in these sessions. And because we have both this, kind of this billion-dollar perspective, but also really understand the less than $50 million perspective. So that's just a little bit about us. Next slide. So one of the things I often get asked this question, having been with many ERP vendors, why Epicor? And I'll say just quite candidly, this is why Epicor. Software is a fantastic enabler of great new processes, but what you really need is a best in industry leadership team that knows what has worked effectively and candidly what hasn't worked in the various other places, so that you really are truly getting best practices. And so if you see, even starting with our CEO, not only was he with competing platforms, but also one of the biggest brands in the market. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. We did talk briefly about Joe with his Big Four experience. And of course, Rebecca as the VP of Sales Operations is part of Joe's team. And then obviously Lisa Pope, our president, which again, if you're rejoining, you know that she has literally carved out an entire career in this space. But all that really means to you is that we're a very collaborative, very accessible executive leadership team with best in industry practices that we use to your benefit, that we bring to your benefit, whether it's in our products, in the way we go to market, the way we support our customers. But also what you're going to see today is we evolve as a company, and how we're pulling in all those experiences together. Next slide. So we're very acquisitive. Many of you are probably grappling with that as well. So, and I put that not only is it exciting and it really implies kind of the momentum that is behind Epicor, but what's also exciting is something that needs to be grappled with is how do you incorporate these acquisitions? This is a very common dynamic in the market. And so, that's why this project around customer centricity is so very, very important. And one of the things that we focused on relative to our billion-dollar best practice series, and we're going to come back to this again and again in the presentation, but the long and the short of it is McKinsey, digital transformation. In fact, actually, as Rebecca and Joe and I were talking about this, digital transformation is just this ridiculously overused term. And McKinsey actually breaks it down into 4 really digestible projects. Most notable, are you in the cloud? Do you have a data-driven business? Are there operational efficiencies? And most notably, and what we're talking about today is customer centricity. So, and if you could move on to the next slide, that's kind of why we're talking about Epicor's own journey to customer centricity, which is really, really very fascinating because I'm sure it's very much what you guys are facing in your own roles within your companies, within your go to market, within your competitive pressure. Because we all know since 2020, there's a new normal. And if we're not oriented in how we are handling our customers have options and our customers will exercise those options. And the window in which they do so is much, much shorter. So that's why I'm so excited about today, because to share, Epicor made a huge reinvestment in Salesforce. And it's a really, really fun story to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and say, tell us about Epicor's customer-centric transformation relative to our decision to reinvest in Salesforce. Rebecca?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kristen. So I'll start out just practically with what we're doing, what our project is, and if I refer to it, our name internally within Epicor is Project Apollo. At this point, I've been talking about this project a lot over the last 2 years, so it's going to be second nature for me to refer to it with that nomenclature. But let's start practically with what exactly are we doing? So we're in process of implementing brand new quote to cash systems. And so what are we talking about? We're implementing Salesforce Sales Cloud, Salesforce CPQ, Salesforce Revenue Cloud as our billing engine, and then RevStream as a whole new revenue system within Epicor. And so it's a huge project. Like I said, 4 systems, the integrations that connect those systems, it all in scope. We started the project about 2 years ago, and we're at the point today where we're headed into cutover and go live. So it's been a 2-year journey, a significant scope, and we went into this project with 4 clear objectives. We're looking to achieve scalability. And so what I mean by that is we've had a business that's grown both organically and inorganically over the last number of years. We have a lot of process that's changed as a result of that growth. And it was time to take a holistic look at that and redesign our processes to allow us to scale more efficiently. We were, scaling in a manner of building manual process, et cetera. This was a time to level set and redesign, get consistent process across our verticals, and be prepared to grow the business moving forward. So that was objective number 1. 2 was to improve our user experience because of that growth. And when I say user experience, I mean user and customer experience. So internal sales experience and then external customers. So through the holistic redesign of our back office systems, we wanted to be providing clearer and more consistent data to our customers and to our sales users. Third was to improve our customer data. And 4th was to improve our reporting. So we went into, again, this is a holistic implementation of new operational systems with 4 objectives that we were looking to achieve out of the project.
Well, and those are really incredibly important 4 elements. And that's one of the reasons that we kind of wanted to talk through this with this specificity, because as you guys look at your own projects, those are the key important elements. But that all does translate into how, relative, if it's the processes internal or external, how the customer feels that you're a partner with them, how they feel like they're being serviced. And you made a great point, Rebecca, in that in terms of our growth. Joe, let me throw it to you. Why not just rest on our laurels and just take the profit? And as opposed to, because we are in such a high growth phase. Tell me more about why now, and we growth is something you just need to accommodate. So why a big project at this time?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Kristen. So as Rebecca alluded to it, we really had this paradigm moment where we had to invest in a tech stack that supports our growth, a clean, unified system. So I won't share a bunch of numbers, but since calendar year 2020, our revenue top line growth has really been propelled by our ability to transform our cloud products and sell our SaaS solutions. And so one data point is since 2020, our SaaS product lines have grown 450%. And as Kristen mentioned, our top line revenue is well above $1 billion. So we have to really think critically about, do we have the infrastructure internally to support that growth? And a lot of the answers were fairly obvious, that we have a system today that will work, but it just entailed a lot of manual effort. And candidly, it was designed for the period of time in which Epicor was heavy in the license mode. So, Epicor is a, well-established business. And for the super majority of our existence, we have sold primarily on-premise licenses. But, as we've evolved and invested significantly in the cloud and the ability to sell those products, our Salesforce stack, our legacy Salesforce stack was just not the right solution to get us to where we needed to be. And so that was really it was a fairly quick assessment. The answer was, I would say, pretty obvious, but let me be clear, it wasn't an easy decision because, there's a lot of work. I know some of your questions later, we'll talk about that, Kristen, but these decisions are, the answer could be relatively obvious, but it is a massive undertaking. And I know we'll talk about some of the challenges, but it's the right decision. And, we're investing in Salesforce and a unified tech stack will help Epicor continue to grow and support the metrics I talked about.
So you both are from, obviously the big four consulting firms. And was there a compelling event that said this, or was this part of just an organizational due diligence where you took a step back and said, what is the right thing to actually do this project? So, adjusting for growth, yes, but help me understand the why now.
Yeah, certainly.
Or why then, 2 years ago?
So fortunately or unfortunately, Rebecca and I have been through a few of these in the past. So we have, the pros and cons and the lessons learned. But I think it was clear to us from our experience in, working in SaaS companies that you, as mentioned, you need a system that allows you to have access to your customer analytics in relative real time, the ability to improve velocity with the sales cycles, and make and remove manual inputs into the process to the furthest extent possible. And I would argue that if you're living in spreadsheets at $1 billion company, something needs to be reassessed. And so we spent a lot of time the last 4 to 5 years cleaning that up. And this is really the capstone is this Salesforce Project Apollo that Rebecca mentioned. And we've grown up. You showed a lot of the acquisitions, Kristen. That's really over the last 36 months. But since Epicor's inception, there's been 20 to 30 plus acquisitions. So the stack that we built over time had a lot of bespoke rules and product SKUs that we just needed to think critically, fresh set of eyes. How do we make this set up for success going forward? And Salesforce is a great partner. I think that's really the right solution, connected to the other tools that Rebecca mentioned with revenue and quoting and billing. So I think it's the compelling event wasn't necessarily time bound. It was, a specific date. It was just around, we've seen so much growth. We have a lot of pain points. Now is the right time to make the shift. And it's been, these take a couple of years to get done right, at least at the scale that Epicor's at.
So, and I want to say that just a little bit and flip to you, Rebecca, if you don't mind. So again, coming back to those 4 digital transformation projects as defined by McKinsey, we could have done operational efficiencies, but have you found that customer centricity is actually driving many of those operational efficiencies, or was it really, that, in terms of maybe Epicor is running particularly, operational efficiency, that customer centricity, as Joe mentioned, was really because of our growth driver. You have a lot of ways as a VP of operations, you have a lot of ways you can put your thumbprint on the company. Again, customer centricity, because it drove so many other side projects and overall improvements, or customer centricity because that was the
Absolutely.
biggest thing relative to the growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were evaluating the project, obviously there are a number of options that you can take in evolving your business and evolving your operations. You can take the approach of looking at ways to make things incrementally better, much less disruptive to the organization. You can look at ways where you kind of move your way through a roadmap. But from our standpoint, we were really at kind of a trajectory point. And we were looking at shifts in the business, to your point on customer centricity. We were looking at ways we were going to interact and sell with our customers that needed to be enriched and enhanced. And to do that, you have to have an integrated platform that functions, seamlessly together to be able to up-level your experience to that point. And so I think back to the evaluation of which path do we go down? Do we incrementally improve our operations, or do we take a holistic approach? You start to weigh the number of projects you have on your roadmap to get where you want to go and how long that's going to take against when you really want to impact your customers and impact the business. And hopefully that makes sense and resonates, but it really becomes a weighing game. How long do you want it to take? How impactful does it need to be? And when we were looking at how we wanted to shift our business, we wanted to do it in, not to use an overused term, we wanted to do it in a transformative manner. Epicor is an exciting place to be right now. And we're doing a lot in the way that we sell and the way that, again, back to the customer theme, and the way that we support our customers. And it took a big move on the operational side to support that evolution.
And I love the way that you gave the context, because incremental change is always an option for every company. But we also, the challenge that we all face is, are we cutting off our nose to spite our face with Band-Aid solutions that really don't, that actually exacerbate a problem? And that's where kind of both of your backgrounds to kind of take that step back. But, so it's really important that both are, and maybe sometimes a combination of kind of a big transformation like customer centricity with incremental changes. But I did want to call attention to anybody who's participating in this call today to think through that long-term effect of incremental changes, and does it cost you more later? And sometimes it looks like it's easy, but you could be, paying the piper, so to speak. So I'm going to shift. Speaking of paying the piper, this project started mid Epicor's fiscal year. Joe, how did you go to the board and say, I'm not sure of anybody having extra money laying around? So how did you actually say to the board, a project that wasn't talked about going into planning for the fiscal year, I want this new spend, and this is why? How did you get that? How did you get the board to agree? Plain and simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way to resonate with the board here was simple. It's, we have, as a cloud first company, we invest in the customers are investing in Epicor for a journey, which should in turn involve a lot of renewal cycles. And we needed a technology system and stack that allows us to better support that growth. And we were seeing a lot of manual touch points in the process, whether that's billing or quoting, that we're introducing friction in the customer experience. And in some ways, I say, if you invest in a system and there's a lot of manual overrides, that's a bug, not a feature. And we're just having to do a lot of manual work to get to the end result. It was workable, and we could get there. But this introduces efficiencies, and cost is a dynamic that the board will appreciate. But in addition to the cost, we did see some savings as a result of consolidating a lot of the systems. But it was more around the ROI we would generate by having a tool that allows us to better support the customer and understand. The key thing we're seeing in this journey so far is we're asking questions that we didn't know we should be asking in the prior system, because we're learning more about the customers. We've cleaned up the SKUs, we've cleaned up the analytics, the recurring revenue structure. and we're better able to understand opportunities to capture value from the customers and also for them to get value out of Epicor. So there was a lot of, it was a robust plan, and there was a lot of things to synthesize as a result. But I think the main thing was, this is going to allow us to be the SaaS company we want to be in 5 to 10 years and beyond. And it'll improve the customer experience, which is a lot of what Rebecca has already mentioned. And the cherry on top was, we will see cost savings and efficiencies as a result of this.
And that's an interesting set of priorities, because if you kind of look at it, if we have an incredibly customer-centric focus, then we're going to be more successful with our cloud growth, right? More adoption, because and then obviously those savings. But I also want to draw just the audience's attention to the manual processes. It's crazy how many we all have in our own companies, no matter how big we are. And we have to embrace it. We've also got a potentially, and yay for them, retiring workforce. So when it gets to if you will, Peter always did it this way. Well, what if Peter wins the lottery? What are we going to do? What if Peter's toes are dug into the sand as he's enjoying some beverage with an umbrella in it as he's kicked off his retirement? So these are these things that all of a sudden there's a brain drain, and I can see the value of bringing that into the system. And what's also interesting too is, I will say from my perspective within the company, I can't tell you how many employees are excited about this, because it's actually making our experience, we're all have like a Christmas countdown calendar to when this is going live, because we all are going to be taller, richer, thinner, better looking. We're so excited about what we're going to be able to harness, so that when we engage with our current customers, we're on point, we're adding value, we know what their histories are. I am okay. Some of that is a smidge of hyperbole, been accused of in the past, but this is really, we as users are super excited about it. So we're very, very, I definitely can see how the board would say, I hear what you're saying, Joe. And then Rebecca, though, it's a big project. So how do you keep people engaged, and what performance metrics did you and Joe commit to that you report on to keep everybody in the boat? Clearly, you've done a great job with sales, because we're in the boat, but you know what? We're not writing your checks. So what were the performance, measurements and objectives you've been marching to and reporting on?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, Kristen, you paint a picture. You really do. I didn't know I was going to be richer and better looking at the end of this project too. So that's
thinner too. Always, I'm always
thinner
looking
too.
to be thinner.
Yeah, thinner too. Goes without saying.
We have that on the record, Christian.
And taller. For those of you who don't know, I'm 5'1", so I'm really looking forward to that taller thing. Think about all that'll be in my reach now when I'm taller. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So first, I'll start by saying this is a very well supported and well advocated project from the board all the way down. And from the start of the project to today, we've had highly engaged track leaders. Track leaders represent the functions across the organization that are heavily invested in the project. We have excellent implementation partners, all highly engaged as well. And so from that standpoint, I've done a number of these. I've consulted on a number of these. This is a very well supported, well engaged project. And I give a lot of kudos to the team, because these are tough to pull off. But if you don't have people coming to the table ready to look for solutions, ready to deliver on those solutions, follow through on them, you're going to have a really tough time getting the project live. And so from that standpoint, I've just been very impressed with the Epicor team. And, a lot of that engagement and excitement comes because folks recognize that this is the right thing to do for our business, for our customers, for our employees that are managing heavily manual processes. And this is an opportunity to change how they're working and to bring career advancement and to allow them to do new things. And so I think across the board, that recognition that this is the right thing to do to advance the business, to change the way that we work, has meant that the buy-in hasn't wavered. And so I think when you take on something incredibly ambitious, it's really being clear in the vision for it and making sure that that vision resonates with the organization and where the organization is. And Epicor was ready to it's an exciting time. I didn't say that lightly. And so Epicor, internal was ready to embrace that change and the excitement that we see in the marketplace. And so we have a lot of metrics that we're tracking toward post go live, but in terms of how are we keeping the focus, how are we keeping the engagement, it's really been organic, and it's because of the vision and the goals that we have from a strategic standpoint, of the project.
So, that brings me kind of a next, as you talk about that. So obviously we all know, and in one of these series, Lisa did post that executive buy-in is critical. It starts at the top and comes down, but also creating that groundswell of where people fit, where they see their role, what part do they play? And that also does help in terms of employee retention, because people do feel like they're part of something bigger and better and feel like they're making an impact. Have things gone as planned? And I'm going to throw that out to the both of you. Have things gone as planned?
Yeah. Well, Rebecca can keep me honest here, but I think there's definitely been some key wins that we've seen throughout the project. And this has been over a 2-year journey and 50 plus people involved in it. And we've had very little turnover. And I think that's really a reflection of Rebecca's leadership and those that are involved. And it's really tied to making sure people are motivated. Motivate's a hard thing to keep a good pulse on or make sure people are properly motivated. But one way to do that is the incentive structure. And so, there's a famous quote that if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And I think we've done a great job, Rebecca and team, of incentivizing folks. And that's not just financially. A lot of it's qualitatively. People want to have experience in Salesforce. People want to be part of the most important project the company's working on. And that gets them excited. Everyone's all 50 folks involved in this project, resume after this will be meaningfully more attractive, and they have gained personal experience that they can take on into the future career. So there's been a lot of good thought into the incentive structure, and the team continuity has been a good surprise and something you plan for, but and inevitably in a lot of projects you see turnover, and we've been fortunate to have a limited turnover on this team. And I think that in addition to that, we have you expect to get support from the broader executive team on these projects, but in the past experience, there are detractors in the company, and we've been fortunate here that through the support of the executive leadership team, that we have buy-in and awareness, and that is a reflection of articulating the why very well, so it resonates with the whole company. And there wasn't a lot of pushback. People understand it, and a lot of people were rallied behind it. And that was a welcome change from some transformations I had done in prior career. And that has really gone as planned, if not better. So I'll stop there. And Rebecca, you can chime in if anything else to add.
Yeah, I would add on to that in other cases, it's sometimes you do these transformation projects for a number of reasons. And is it just something you have to do? You've had a significant merger, whatever the case is. And so the support is there, but it's a little more on the passive side. I will say this is active support within the organization, meaning the CEO is promoting it, is talking about it, is excited about it. And so it does go all the way down. From a practical project standpoint, have things gone as expected? And we had some challenges. Certainly have had some challenges, and just for the folks that may be dealing with projects like this or looking in, considering projects like this, we had a really good team, folks that had done a number of these. So we were very well set up and well structured, and had clear guidance on what to expect. So we were able to communicate with the team what to expect, how we're going to run the project, how we're going to hit design, how we're going to manage our UATs. We're going to do this in an agile format. So we really had good experience there. And I would encourage folks to, go into that. This may be saying something that's kind of course, but go into that very prepared to communicate with folks on how it's going to go. And from that standpoint, we've stuck to our design timeline, but we've had things shift through the project, and we have had to adapt. We've increased our scope halfway through. We've looked at how we're managing data migration, and you really have to be ready to pivot when things like that come up. And so the team's done a great job as we went through our decision to change scope, as we went through our decisions around data migration. And so, we have had challenges, we have had pivots, but it's important that you come together, you bring the leadership team together, bring them along on those decisions with you, and then you're going to have the buy-in as you continue through the rest of the journey.
And that's a really interesting point, because so often technology has been positioned as worker replacement. And what Epicor is very, very committed to is worker enablement and worker, employee satisfaction. And you're making that point that not only do they feel like they're part of something bigger and much more impactful. Joe, you also made the point that it advances their professional agendas as well, but also too, because there is such a team, they're having their input, and they're making into individual specific things that will make their jobs better too. So it's an interesting balance, because technology is really to enable a much more satisfied employee, not replace and reshift people who are often wanting to do more into much more meaningful roles. Have you seen new leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that we address that head on at the beginning of the project. Very clear communication on this is about shifting where we put our focus, value add activities, not processing activities, not moving transactions from one place to another, right? Engaging with the customer, moving upstream, engaging with our sales team. So this is about shifting how we work, not about eliminating roles. And we have seen new leaders. We have a circle of excellence or a center of excellence, in Monterrey, Mexico. We've had a couple of leaders come up from that organization that are now track leads, have had promotions through the evolution of the project. And so it's really given an opportunity for growth. We've had, teams come together. We've globalized a function because we're learning how those teams work together. And so from that standpoint, you have a heavily engaged leadership team and a heavily engaged, team all the way down. And so you really get an opportunity to learn about how folks work in a different way when you go through one of these projects.
So, you obviously needed to revise scope. So there were some obstacles there. Joe, what was the largest obstacle? I certainly have, I have my opinions within Epicor, but what was your biggest thing or two or three things that you came against that said, to Rebecca's point, it's time to pivot?
Yeah, I think there's really three obstacles that are the meta obstacles. It's around scope creep. We talked about that. And that's, as you get into these big projects, you get a lot of opinions. A lot of people want everything to be perfect. It's a cliche statement, perfect is the enemy of good. And I think really optimizing for the super majority or the vast majority of use cases, it's easier said than done. And so getting into the weeds and understanding what are things you got to say no to. So saying no is okay in these projects, because if you say yes to everything, you'll just drag out for a decade. And so I think managing scope creep, has been we expected that challenge, but as you get into the amount of SKUs and customers, it can be really hard. And I think we've done a good job, but it's an obstacle in any project. And then, the second one is really around data. And you spend a lot of time up front building the requirements and the design of the system. And it oftentimes, the millions of lines of data, in our case, of what you're going to migrate, tends to get introduced later in the project. And so I would say advice there is have a data track and person assigned on day one. And I would highly suggest that that person is within the company. So you clearly have outside expertise in a consulting firm, but having someone who is an employee of the company that owns the data and has the know-how to understand how to build the schema and is technical enough to work through the challenges of data migration is a huge uplift. And that's the longest pole in the tent, I would say, in any customer transformation, is migrating legacy data to the new system, testing it, ensuring you're confident enough that when you flip the switch to go live, the requirements will work because you've tested them, but the data that you're bringing over is going to be ready for customer transactions. So I think those are the two obstacles. We work through a lot of time and effort. I think Rebecca's gone through 26 or 27 UATs. I always get the number wrong, but we spend a lot of time on this. And those two things that pieces of advice I would have is make sure you're not solving for perfection, and ensure early and often you're thinking critically about the data migration strategy.
Well, and also, measure twice, cut once, right? With the 25 or 27 UATs, as much as the audience is probably thinking, wow, that's a lot, but we're $1 billion company. When you go very public, give yourself practice, give yourself that grace of really working through the fine points. Rebecca, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just add, related to the scope of the project, we did make a decision halfway through, right? Our initial scope, we were looking at going live with Salesforce and CPQ. It was going to be broken down into a 2-phase. So we had evaluated, we did an upfront, we evaluated operational, process end to end. What do we need to change? We had made the decision, we need to do these 4 platforms. But first, we're going to do CPQ, we're going to do Salesforce, we're going to do CPQ. Phase 2, we're going to do billing, we're going to do revenue. As we were working through the first half of the project, it became apparent that, due to a number of reasons we can get into, but most importantly, our data structure, how our systems talk together currently, how we maintained our data today, that it was going to be very, very difficult to make that break in phase. There was going to be a lot of work in the middle to design in systems that we knew were going to go away. And so we were looking at a phased approach, get the quick wins, get a year in, get the quick wins on Salesforce and CPQ, then come down line, do your billing, do your revenue. We made the tough decision to expand scope when we were looking at the amount of rework it was going to take to do that middle stage, right? That bridge between systems that were going to be decommissioned. And, when you go into these projects, it can be very tough to make that decision and that case. And it's really incumbent that you work with the business and you work with your leaders and you really weigh, here's what we think it takes to do A and B, and to not make that decision in a vacuum. So I think just back to the lessons learned, don't be afraid to make the tough decisions, but get the consensus and bring the leaders along on that journey. And so that really did represent how we went from, a 1-ish year project to a 2-year. But it was the right move and the right decision. And importantly, how we got there was the right way of going about it.
Well, and that 1-year decision would have been that Band-Aid that we mentioned earlier that would end up, in fact, probably constraining our growth going forward. So would have been probably in scope and on budget, but where would we be in 3 and 5 years if we don't, address these? And what's really important is that middle stage. If everybody kind of thinks about it, software is business process expressed in technology. And you're really honing in on the fact that you really need to understand how your company works, in fact, how they think, and make sure the software is an extension of that where appropriate. Because the other thing too, we all have these. Well, we always did it. Well, this is the way. Well, is anybody asking the question why? Why? I tell a torturesome story about a new couple who, throws off, through this history. They lob off this part of the roast, and the new husband says, why? Gets to the grandmother as he goes through all the generations and says, because my pants were too small. I mean, it's really an important, why did they cut that end off of the roast? And so it wasn't any real reason why. It was a very tactical, immediate response. And we really need to, not in an aggressive way, but in a curious way, ask, why are we doing these things? And not just because we've always done these things. I do talk a lot about the new normal, but things are changing at a crazy speed, and expectations are evolving at a rate that we never saw that. But that is going to be our new normal. So there's a healthy debate in why. There's a healthy discussion. And where Epicor is very tribal with all those acquisitions, the 20 that Joe mentioned, you can see why people wanted to keep their own processes. Not only were they uncomfortable about being acquired, as with every company that does an acquisition, they want their own thing, but they also come from a different skill set. So, it's really important to ask why and really tease out, does it make sense to grandfather those forward? Did you learn any new processes that, Joe, and I'll switch, I get, and maybe this is more appropriate for you, but what were some unanticipated benefits? Okay, we've kind of talked about what you've learned. You started on the scope creep, but are there other ancillary things that you didn't expect were going to happen that, like, whoa, that's coming? Like, for example, sales actually being excited about this. I'm sure you were probably dreading the rollout to sales. Salespeople were lazy. We don't want to do anything we don't have to. We certainly don't want to learn anything new. So, what were some unanticipated benefits, and as random as extreme, other than the goodness in doing it?
Yeah, I think the people culture aspect of these projects is definitely the hardest part. And when you see this culture of a Project Apollo take a life of its own and become an exciting thing that people want to be assigned to, as mentioned, and work on, and you have a lot, cross company support for this, that was unanticipated, and getting excitement was huge. And the team has done a good job of gamifying the UATs, adding prizes, and some of these things you see it seeded from the folks that work on it, and a lot of smart people rise to the surface. We knew the people involved in the project were smart and had a lot of good ideas, but once you give them, empower them, it's amazing what you see and how much motivation. And you mentioned leaders earlier. If you're a shining star on a project like this that's complex and hard, and you don't, what other project should you get promoted if not this one? Like, this is one has, I think we have about a half a dozen promotions coming out of this. So it's easy to talk about kind of the design, the technical aspect, but people and culture is super important in this. And there's no silver bullet, or here's what you have to do. But I think empowering people, finding the smart folks that have interest, and then as we talked about, galvanizing the organization around it has been an unanticipated benefit above and beyond what we already expected. And then secondly, we've talked about one of the key metrics for success for me, and this is, are we answering or ask questions we didn't know we should previously be asking? And we've already seen in the early stages of this project, there's questions that we're asking that, wow, like, we've been around for 50 years. I didn't know that's an interesting data point or an interesting trend. Let's dig into it and let's get the answer to it. And that's pretty powerful. And I think there's much more to come. We're in the infancy of this transformation, but those are two unanticipated benefits I would think are super powerful.
Rebecca, did you see any unanticipated benefits?
I would echo what Joe said regarding sales engagement and sales excitement around the project is high. This is a very supportive sales organization, and that's fantastic. I think that was unanticipated for sure. The forcing function of a project like this is you really do learn a lot about the business, and we certainly have a lot of tenure in the organization and a number of folks that are vast knowledge, and I'm talking 20 plus years, 40 plus years. And so from that standpoint, we've really had the opportunity to learn at a depth that you don't often get the chance to learn a lot about our products. Early insights. I think we're going to get a different view in product level reporting coming out of Project Apollo. And to Joe's point, in working through the design for our product master, we've already acquired a number of insights and expect that to grow as we launch the system, get live, get all of our data in the system. So I think really, it's been a learning curve across the team. And from the people that have a lot of tenure, they're learning a different way to work. And I think it's exciting. And one thing you mentioned in kind of one of your last comments is, but I do it this way. That is something that you constantly, as a leader of one of these transformation projects, you constantly need to remind that this is about looking at it differently while respecting what you need to do to support the business. And so from that standpoint, I think folks that have been here for a long time have gotten an opportunity to learn how to do things differently.
Well, and people probably surprise you too. Whenever you're doing a big process change, there's a certain element of you wait to see who gloms on to the new concepts, and they'll surprise you. Don't necessarily assume that a 40-year employee doesn't want to make change. Sometimes they, certainly in my experience with Epicor, I've had people saying, you know what, thankfully, I've been saying this for 20 years. I'm so glad to have somebody who wants to listen. So, be careful that you shed your pre-existing expectations of some of your employees too, because you don't know, they'll surprise you as well. So did you also learn things about our processes? I certainly know I have. What are some of the big learnings of your processes? And then also too, of those processes you learn, any other advice you give to our audience members? And Joe, I'll give it to Rebecca first, then I'll turn those same two questions to you. Rebecca?
Yeah. So in terms of process learning, I think Joe mentioned it. We're tribal, right? We have a lot of acquisitions. And so from that standpoint, there are a lot of little learnings across the way. But the overarching theme is that teams, with the way our systems were architected in the past, teams have been allowed to be a little siloed. And so from that standpoint, we're learning a lot about individual teams, and we're learning, how to bring that together and bring that forward into our design. And one thing that I would, say to folks on the call is really, you're only going to be as successful. Like, success is incumbent on really working through those design points, back to the 80% rule, but really working with those stakeholders. If you're in a similar situation where you have a siloed organization, or you have, areas that are working, independently, success is incumbent on getting in there, finding the common thread that you can build on to bring a cohesive experience together. And hopefully that resonates. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of conversations. And from a leadership standpoint, that's one of my primary roles on the team, right? Is where we have those blockers or where we have the silos in the process, it's working with the leaders in that organization to find a common thread and find a way to make the system work in a standard manner. And so you really, if you're in a leadership position on a project like this, it's engage with the business heavily in those areas and find the solutions, because you'll be in a tough position at go live if you don't do that diligence.
And I want to jump on the common thread. Don't over engineer the common thread. Sometimes it can be something as simple as, wouldn't you just love to be able to leave on time, as opposed to, having to, use your, as soon as 5 o'clock comes, and use all your time for data entry to get caught up. I mean, sometimes it doesn't have to be that big and overarching. It can be something very simple. And that's one of the things that, I once worked with a company where they would post the schedule with tape on a pole in the middle of the shop floor. Well, weren't they tired of the fact that, 30 people then had trouble getting them back to work? I mean, because they were all chit-chatting, et cetera. So sometimes it's a very, very simple, kind of obvious thing. So don't overlook the obvious and don't overcomplicate it. Joe, what are your things, what are your suggestions about existing processes and advice to audience members?
Yeah, just a couple pieces of advice. I think Rebecca was spot on with the assessment of the processes. These types of transformations are becoming table stakes. So if you haven't thought about, your customer-centric transformation, it's very loaded words, but I think, your tech stack internally, Salesforce, billing, quoting, and how you support the customers. If you haven't thought about transforming or cleaning up that tech stack, I highly recommend you do it. And whatever, the general rule for me in my experience is however long you think it's going to take, double it. So if the initial timeline's a year, it probably will take 2. So more back to the first point of get started on these, because it's becoming, regardless if you're a technology company or not, I think having this type of technology stack internally to support your customers is going to be super important. And one way to assess, how urgent that is do an assessment of how many manual overrides do you have in your customer process. To do a walkthrough of from the beginning when I sign a customer to when I renew them, everything that happens, and how many manual overrides, you can define what that is, happen. And that, you probably would learn a lot. And we did that early on. And back to the origin of the project, it was very clear there were a lot of manual processes that could be optimized. So think about that critically. And we talked about heavily incentivizing the team. So, the people and culture, I can't harp on this enough, is super important. And if you go through these two-year projects, you got to stay very active and ensure, the burnout, morale are, we're properly monitoring that. And that's something I think about a lot. And, we also mentioned executive team buy-in. So we were very clear on day one, this is not a CFO project. The office of the CFO is going to program manage the project, but this is a company-wide project. And in doing so, we have a steering committee. We have half of our executive team is on it, and they all have decision-making authority, and they're all weighing in on these things. But doing it in a way that, sometimes we have healthy tension, healthy disagreement, and we align, and, where we disagree, we find ways to solve it. And then if you have 50 or so people on the project and, thousands of end users, in our case, don't over democratize the process, because you're going to get a lot of input. Some of it may be good, some of it may be, not scalable. And I think we've done a good job of finding the right balance there. We want people to be heard, but we also want to make sure we get the project done and it allows us to be set up for success.
That's fair. So we're kind of at time and potentially over, but we did want to make sure we took any kind of questions that are from the audience. If Morgan, do you have any questions? And Joe, you bring up, first of all, before we move to Morgan's questions, I really want to, that was really, really well, that's great advice for going forward, the way that you talk about that, not only with the steering committee, but the over democratization, because at some point you just do have to get stuff done. And capturing the manual overrides. Think about each of you in your own companies, how many times that we all do it. You've actually made me think, how many manual overrides do I have in our process? But anyway, let me turn it over to Morgan, relative to you. Any questions from the audience?
Yes, a couple came through. The first question, did you evaluate other CRM solutions before deciding to reinvest in Salesforce?
So from a CRM standpoint, platform standpoint, we did not. Salesforce for a SaaS business, software business, really is the gold standard. And so from that standpoint, we did not do another evaluation of our CRM platform. We did do full evaluations of CPQ, billing, and revenue systems. So we did RFPs for all 3 of those systems before making our selections. But we did move forward with Salesforce as the CRM platform.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Last question. Above and beyond becoming more customer-centric, do you see Epicor being able to use the data in other ways?
Yeah, I touched on some of this earlier. I think every company aspirationally wants to monetize data in some way, shape, or form. So I think having this system in place, and we'll learn things that we didn't know we previously would not have learned, I think will be a huge opportunity for us. And I think about the finance organization's mission statement is not just traditional stay in your lane finance anymore. It is getting into that postmodern strategic view of we sit on all this data, we sit on all these insights, and we have point solution the use cases to where it's month-end close, quoting, billing. But if you zoom out, there's so many trends. And if you think about data science and large language models, which is a whole nother topic, there's a lot of things I think we can do above and beyond just the implementation of the system that are super exciting.
Yeah, and think about the opportunity too with those insights to be able to shape what products we're offering to the market, right? And adapting with them, because we want to build products that, as our CTO says, people want to use. And that's the kind of stuff that we can be smarter about. So, Morgan, any other questions? Or Kathy, do you want to thank us to close out?
Thanks again. This is a great conversation. Love the topic. Love all the questions that in the conversation going on today. At this point, we'll probably close out the program. And I would like to thank you, Joe, Rebecca, and Kristen for putting this presentation together for us.
Well, and thanks for the opportunity. We really appreciate being
Awesome.
here.
Oh,
Thanks
always.
very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
You too.